Let's start from the first issue, and we're going to save the country names locally. And in my networking here, I'm going to create another file, and I'm going to do it a Swift file, and this is going to be local file manager, right? And let's create a final class local file manager. And again, this is going to have a static let shared equals local file manager, initialize it, and we have a private init that can be initialized only from inside. So we have a singleton class, local file manager, and this class is going to have two functions. One is to save data locally, and one is to fetch the data back from locally. So every time we get this JSON from our API, we want to save that JSON into our local directory. And then we would like to get back before we ask for our API to fetch again the list of countries, we want to come and ask our local file manager, if we have a data already stored, please give that back to us. Otherwise, let's go and fetch from network and save it locally. So first function called save countries locally. And we need to pass country data, which is data optional. And the second function is func fetch local countries. And this is going to take no parameters, but it will return a data optional because we may not have anything in our local database. And finally, a private func, this is a helper function, get document directory, and this will return a URL object of our local document directory. So I'll say file manager default.urls for in, the for is going to be our document directory. In this is going to be our user domain mask, and we want to get the first and wrap this. So this basically would send us the file storage place that iOS will provide to our application so that we can store local files. So now let's look into our save countries locally. So once we get the data, country data, we'll say if let country data equals country data. So because this is an optional, we need to first double check if there is anything. If there is, we are going to proceed. We'll say if let, and we want to create now a JSON from that data. We say JSON, and because this may throw, we say try question mark, and JSON serialization, the same way we actually used to print our data previously in our network call. Remember, we are going to get a JSON object with it's gonna be our country data and options empty string, empty array, sorry, as, and this is going to be string as a key and any as a value. So once we have the JSON ready, we can try and write this to our document directory. So I will say do a catch block here. I believe I'm missing a curly brace here. Do catch. So what we want to do is we will say let file URL is equals to our get documents directory, our function that will return, and then appending path component. I want to put the name of the file that we would like to save this under. Mine, I'm going to call country.json. It's very important to use the same file name here when we are saving, and the same when we are going to fetch it back, because if we use different names, we are not going to get saved item back because they don't match the names. And I would say try JSON serialization data with JSON object and options, and I will pass my JSON here. And the options are not needed. We need to write on it to file URL. So we will try to write this JSON data to our file URL, whatever we are going to get. And this may fail. That's why here I'm going to say print error localized description. So this was our save countries locally. We pass data that we receive from our API, and it converts to JSON with string and any as key value pairs. And then we get our file directory that our application is allowed to use, and put this as our file name and try to save it to that directory. Now to fetch it back, we need to again use to catch block here, because it may throw an error. So we need to get the URL again. I'm going to actually copy this just so we don't make any typos in the file name. So we have our file URL. We will say let data is equals, and we need to try to get data from contents of file, and we need to pass a URL, which is our file URL here. So if this is successful, we are going to convert it and save it to our data. And then I can safely say return data. And for our catch, I want to say print error localized description, and we want to return nil, because here we promise that we are going to return date optional. So if we don't have anything saved, we want to return nil, so that we know that nothing was saved there. Another very common mistake I'm doing. Here I was returning date, not data. Right, so this is our file to save and load items. Now we need to put it into use with our API service. So if I go to the function that is fetching all the countries, all the regions. Now before we fetch something, we want to check if we already have that. So at the top here, I'm actually going to cut this decoder and paste it at the top here, because we need to use it on somewhere else as well. In case if we have something in our local database, we will use this JSON decoder to decode that data. Otherwise, if we don't, we will continue using it here to decode whatever we get from the API. So we have the JSON decoder at the top, so we have access to it. Then I will say, let's put a note here, check if local data is available. So say if let data equals local file manager shared dot fetch local countries. In this case, we have some kind of data we have received from local file. So what we want to do is exactly the same thing we are doing here. We use our do catch block and our decoder to convert this data into our all countries and send it back. Just the only difference, I don't need the exclamatory mark here because we just check if data is available. And if we do, here we want to exit our function by calling return because we don't want to continue the rest. If we don't, this will not be called. We will continue with our report fetching. Everything goes as planned. We are almost going to return the information. But before we do that, it's good to save locally. So I will say file manager shared, not file manager, local file manager shared save, and then we pass our data here and we can unwrap. Actually, we don't have to unwrap this because we are passing an optional data. All right, so this would save everything locally and then it would return for the first time whatever we have. And the next time when we come and try to fetch it, we will exit and return something from our local database. And to see if that works, I'm going to do a print here, say returning from local data. And here I'm going to put returning from API. All right, so let's run our application. And let me scroll all the way up. It says returning from local API. Run one more time. Returning from local data. So the first time it was returning from the API. I should have removed the local because it's misleading word. Local is not API. The first time it printed that returning from API, which means we didn't have anything in our server, local file storage. The second time it says returning from local data, which is here, which means that now everything is saved in our local device. So you can try to even disable the internet on your phone and when you are running it, and you will still have the list of all countries. This information you will not get, but list of all countries you will still have access to from from your offline device, because they are stored locally now. Okay, so this part is done. The second one is to work on our